Hey everybody, it's Manny from Chapel Forge, and this is Zad. Typically, we come to you with food preservation videos. Right now, we've been working through the Pantry Challenge with Three Rivers Homestead, which has been super fun. This video is going to be about KitchenAid mixers. So if you follow us on Facebook or on Instagram, a little bit on YouTube, I've talked about this. Zad repairs KitchenAid mixers as part of our business. We sort of fell into this. I bought a KitchenAid mixer for 50 bucks. It was like probably 20-ish or more years old when I bought it. It had never been serviced. It kind of was running a little rough. I don't think it was leaking, but it was running pretty rough.
It was running really rough.
Yeah. So Zad was like, well, maybe I can figure out how to do this. Him and my dad chatted about it a little bit, and he had found some videos on YouTube and just sort of started troubleshooting how to fix this. And then, of course, I shared it on Facebook, and then everybody said, oh, can you fix my mixer? I have grandma's mixer. Mine's leaking, blah, blah, blah. And it sort of just became a thing. And as you can see, we have had to upgrade our table because there are just mixers galore everywhere. He's got like 10 here right now, which I'm sure to some people are like, who cares? Like, you can't make a living off of 10 mixers. Maybe not, but it's a nice little extra source of income for us. There's clearly a need. I hear from people seriously probably daily that are like, oh, I wish I had someone in Tulsa, in Dallas, in Portland, Canada. You know, I had somebody from England the other day. So we're in Pennsylvania. We have 2 drop locations. Mr. Mixer is Zach. He's great. Zach and Jacob, right?
Yeah.
They're in Kansas. They're fantastic also. Also, you can take your mixer to them if you're in their neck of the woods. You also have the option to ship it. So like if you're maybe like east of the Mississippi, you can ship it to us. If you're west of the Mississippi, ship it to him. You know, I realize that shipping is super expensive, / you have to try, like, especially if your mixer has a lot of sentimental value or whatever, it was a hand-me-down or something or an heirloom, then that can be a little nerve-wracking also. So the other option that we chat with people about is that you can DIY your mixer repair. Mr. Mixer has a bunch of videos about like specific things, like if you tear into it and it needs something specific. So that's going to talk to you today about how to do like a general repair. I'm sure in the future we'll do videos on specific things and troubleshooting them or whatever. If you decide to DIY your mixer repair, you can buy a kit on Amazon for like 10 bucks. You'll get a seal for a professional and for an artisan, and you'll get the grease that you need to do it. It'll come with like a little paddle thing. So you could follow along with videos and do that yourself. Zad also offers phone consults, so you can find that at our website at chapelhillforge.com, and you can book through our Calendly link and get a phone consult with him, and he can help you troubleshoot if you have really specific questions or get really stuck or something like that.
Okay, so this is the mixer that I'm going to be working on. It's a tilt head, ultra power KitchenAid mixer. The customer stated they had a few problems with it. I've already kind of looked into those. They're more user error than machine error. So typically what I do is I plug this in when I get it. I run it through the speeds, make sure that it sounds right. It sounds like it should. Everything is working the way it should. And then I break into it, start taking it apart. So I'll show you how I do that. These are some of the tools I use. If you're a DIYer, you may not have these tools. Some of these tools just make it easier, make it more time efficient. When I started out, I didn't have some of these. I've gotten them as I've been doing more and more of them, and finding things that make my life easier. So I have a rubber mallet here. This kind has 2 different densenesses of rubber. My pick that I use for scraping out the grease and or gunk. This is your typical putty knife. This is what I started out with. I use this to get the bulk amount of the grease out, and I use this little one here more for the little crevices and the smaller areas that I can't fit this. A standard screwdriver. This one's a flathead. This is a really nice ratchet screwdriver. I really like this one. It helps me speed up, and it has multiple bits, so I'm not having to dig in my toolbox to get multiple things. These are punches. These are going to help you get certain pins out. You may not have these. When I did my very first one, I got a nail and used a nail. It's not ideal, but it got the job done. Toothbrush, old toothbrush, just to try to get some areas of dust or dirt. And here's some picks that are different angled heads. They help me get a bunch of the grime and gunk out. Nail nose pliers. Sometimes I just can't get my fingers to grab certain things, little parts or pieces. These are snap ring pliers. I'll show you what I'll use these for then. Some mixers have them, some don't. Majority of them do, but that's pretty much the tools that we'll be using. So there's a mixer. I'm going to run it through its different settings. Make sure when you're working on these that you always unplug it. You don't want to take a chance of getting shocked. I'm going to take off the screw here at the top. They're always Phillips. I've only ever had one that was a flathead. And put that in your container. Next, you're going to take the band off. As you can see in here, you can see it's kind of greasy. Got some residue in here. You can definitely tell that there's some grease residue here and here. There's some dust that's got some grease residue on it. So we're going to wipe this down, clean this out. What I'll do is I take this pin out, and that removes the upper from the lower. I find it easier to do it that way to work on them. You don't have to. It's kind of hard to get your screwdriver in here and under here to get all those screws out. So I tend to break it off of its base because I find it easier to do it that way. So the other thing you need to do is take this bezel off. So very gently, you want to just kind of place this right here, just on the lip of it, and give it a little tap. And by doing that, that bezel will drop right out. And you can also see how much gunk is inside that bezel there and that drip edge. So now that that's off and the back and the band is off, this is something, once again, if you're a DIYer, you may not have one, but I've found that with the amount that I'm doing, it's worth doing it. I have this piece of plywood with 2x4s, and I will take this mixer and flip it upside down gently and set it right inside that base. And then that way I have a nice easy platform to work from. Inside here there's going to be a little set screw that you need to take this flathead screwdriver and undo that set screw so that it loosens up its grab on this pin here. This is where the big punch comes in handy. Put it right here on that. And then base comes off just like that, and I set that to the side. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove this pin here, and then we're going to take the 4 screws here and the 5 that are under the planetary out. But first we're going to take that pin out. Take that pin, put it in our container. You don't want to lose it. At this point, you're going to take your flathead screwdriver, very gently, you're going to put it in there, right where one of those screw hole spots is. Put it in here and gently pry up on it. Some are tougher, some come out easy, but you just want to kind of sit there and give it some pressure to lift up, going around. And eventually you can get your fingers underneath it, twist back and forth, and it'll come off. Here's your planetary gear. So the mixer motor is attached to this shaft here. This spins around, which spins the planetary around, which will allow this gear to turn on this gear here. That's how your attachment spins. This is where one of those times you're going to need that snap ring plier to get that snap ring off if you're going to clean real good right here. Depending on the mixer, depends on how many of these little like paper washers you have. It's sometimes I have one, sometimes I have two, three, it all depends. But those two there, you're going to want to make sure that you put back in that spot. So remember how many were there and where they went. Otherwise, things won't line up just right. There's a lot of gunk, as you can see, that was caught up in those heads of that screw. Depending on the age of the mixer, these will either be flathead Phillips or square head number 2. And all of these screws do not have washers except for the very back corner here. This one here has a lock washer. It's the only one that has a lock washer. It goes right back here on your mixer. The also difference that you need to make sure you pay attention to is the shape of the head. This one here goes right under the planetary. The round, more thicker head goes in the body. The ones in the planetary sometimes have little burrs on the metal, so just be careful when you're taking them out with your fingers that you don't cut yourself or snag your skin. Now it's pretty much ready to be cracked open. The only thing is with this one, because it's an older one, it has this plastic piece here where the cord goes in. They are a little bit finicky and hard to get out. I've found that if you take it and you kind of twist it to where you see two little lines, they pop out pretty easy. Some of them, not as much. This one was in my favor. I have another jig here, another piece of wood. There's a screw right here that holds it from sliding in this board. So what I do when I am ready to split it in half is I put this here so that I have a spot to go with it. I turn my stand around here. You're going to take your flathead screwdriver and put it right inside where your levers are and just give it a little turn. And it'll crack it open and split it. A lot of times that gasket is holding a really nice tight seal on it. And then you're just going to sit here and try to lift it up on both sides evenly. And once you get it up, I turn it over and I set it into my jig. That keeps my mess there and keeps my mess here. You can see the grease here on this one and all that grease down in here on this one. So I will start cleaning this out. I pull the gasket off. That's trash. And then I'll start with my big scraper. And I'm not going to show you the whole time of me scraping the grease out, but I'll give you a quick little rundown. So I'll just take my scraper here and scoop this out and get that grease. And then I put it right here on my shop towel or the paper towel. And you just want to keep taking all that grease out until it's empty and cleaned out. Okay, so I've scraped out all the grease with either my little scraper tool here or with the putty knife. I've gotten as much as I can out with that. The last thing I'll do is I'll take my blue shop towels here and I'll wipe out that area there. I'll also take my tub of towels that I use It's kind of like an industrial baby wipe. And I will wipe and scrape out all this grease right here that's dried and crusty. And I'll clean this whole area here up with it. I'll get spots like this here where there's grease. I'll clean in here where your speed switches. I'll get down in all those little crevices, get all that clean before I put it back together. Also, this knob is missing, so if the customer wants that replaced, sometimes find them on Amazon where they just slip on and they lock on. I have not had much luck. A lot of times you just have to purchase this whole piece right here. To replace that, this screw comes out. It sets into this metal rod that's underneath here, and the spring goes into a little hole right here, right there. And you just pop that spring off and you put that on and you're good to go. The next thing I'm going to tackle is this ooey gooey goodness here. And then I'll do the same thing to that base as I'm going to do to this base, and that's scrubbing it clean. I like to start on this piece, get this all good, all clean, already nice. Move on to that piece. Then I do the base. Then I go back to reassembly. Also, a little side note that I didn't think about, but when you're wiping this well out, this gear here, your worm gear, right here on the tip, they are extremely sharp right here. And you can really catch your skin right on that tip there. So just really be careful when you're wiping it out that you don't get your hand or your fingers caught right here. There's like 3 of them on the end of that shaft. I've tore myself up a few times just forgetting or being careless, whatever you want to call it, being in a hurry. So just be careful when you get that. And you just want to try to get this whole thing focused. There we go. Just want to wipe that out. I haven't done it yet, but you're going to want it to kind of look like that area there. It might just be me being a little overzealous here, but I figure if the grease is old and bad, why not get it all out? So when you put new grease in, it's just new grease and it's not getting combined with any of the old grease. The other thing you want to do with your grease is make sure when you're cleaning it out, look at it carefully. If it's kind of looks like glitter, or it's shiny or sparkly, or it looks like, you know, there's glitter in it, that's a sign that there could be some metal shavings in your grease from your gears or other components of your mixer. If that's the case, you really want to be pay extra attention to these cogs of these gears and make sure that they're in good condition, because if not, then that could be an issue. And eventually, if you let it run with bad gears or gears that are wearing down and that metal's getting in that grease, it's just going to tear up even more gears or other components of your mixer and make it wear out sooner or break down sooner. It's just like throwing a bunch of sand into your engine oil or components of your car. It's just going to really wear that down and make it not last as long. These are the Turbo towels. Look really great for getting grease and gunk off. I'm just wiping this because once I put it back together, I'm not going to be able to get this surface here. I'll only be able to get this. So I try to get this all wiped down the best I can. Sometimes it's stained really bad and you just can't get it. All the scrubbing you do, you just can't get the staining off. But I try to do my best with getting it clean, or as clean as I can get it. There's a little groove right here where that band sits. You want to get that nice and clean. At this point, I'm going to put this gear back in because I don't want to forget about it. I've done that a time or two, and it's not fun. So, take that grease, just going to put it on here like this. Cover your gear with grease. Take that, slide it right there. into its spot, give it its home. At that point, that part of it's done. I'm going to be moving on to the other piece. I'm going to put the accessory cover back on, screw the screw down, and this piece is done. I'm going to address a little bit of the dirt back here once I am done with the other stuff. Okay, for the planetary, if you're a DIYer and you don't have all the tools, then I would say clean this real well. There's a lot of food gunk built up on this. I mean, this is by far not the worst, but it's not the best either. But I mean, you can see that gunk that's built up there. So you're going to want to wipe this down real good. Get that food gunk off of it. Wipe the grease off of here. If you can get the grease off these gears, get the grease off these gears. If you have a pair of snap ring pliers, you want to take those tips and put them in those little holes and pop it off. So sometimes they can be kind of a bear to get off. Whatever you do, if you do take these off, just be careful. They do like to shoot across the room. They're not very big and they can be hard to find. If you're able to get those off, you're going to pop this gear off, set it to the side. There's a little pin right here that you take off. When you're putting it back together, you need to make sure this pin meshes up with those little slots there, just like so. That's how that is able to turn. You're gonna slide that shaft out. There's usually a washer. Now you can get in here and clean this real well. There's also another snap ring here that you can use to take this off and take the spring and the retainer off. If you can't get it off for whatever reason, sometimes even with these snap ring pliers, the holes are a little small and it can be kind of hard. Pull that spring down and take a pick or a toothpick or something, and you're going to get a lot of gunk. That's food grime. That's junk from your food that is sitting in there. You want to get that cleaned out. On the back side as well, run that around. You'll have a bunch of food there. You just want to scrape that clean. Get all that junk out of there. Scrape this one clean up in here. If you're using a pick like what I have, be careful. Those suckers really hurt when they go into your finger. When I'm doing this part, I will take all these parts off, but I really try to get the bulk of the grease off before I take them out of their home. To me, it just means that I'm not having to handle the part as greasy if I can get the bulk of the grease off this assembly and this assembly. If I get the majority of that off, then it's less that I've got to sit there and hold and try to clean by hand. So I just try to scrape this thing down as best as I can, get the majority of it off, and then I break it down. So when you break it down, there's 3 screws, one here, and one on the back side. You undo those 3 Phillips screws and this whole piece will lift off. Then there's this rod here, or shaft, with a pin through it that suspends this shaft from falling all the way through. So you have to lift this up, pull that pin out, and then this will drop down. There is an O-ring right here that you don't really want to push through that sleeve, so that way, what you want to do is make sure that you protect that O-ring. So drop it out the other way. There's that little pin. So to the side so you don't lose it. Then the shaft will drop down. Pull it out. You have your gear. Still a lot of grease. You saw how much I took off before I even removed it. Set that down. Don't forget, you're going to have another one of those like paper, cardboard, kind of hard plastic or I'm not even exactly sure what it's made out of. It's very fibrous. It's not metal. But you're going to have that washer. Don't want to lose that. Now we can go to cleaning the rest of the base, getting the rest of that grease off of it. When your gasket seems to fail, especially with these tilt heads where they tilt up, it allows it to seep out here and it settles down into these crevices in here. You can kind of see the shininess right there. That's grease that is broken down and now is oil. So we're going to clean this area here up. We're going to get the best we can with cleaning up this area. That way, when I send it back and the customer has it, there shouldn't be any grease, oil leaking from it. I don't have a parts cleaner where I can just drop this whole thing in and let it sit there and, you know, run through like a washing machine kind of deal. So I do my best between the tub of towels and Q-tips and paper towels and shoving this down with the paper towel to get that grease out. But there's only so much you can do when you have all those little small crevices. We're gonna scrub and get all this old grease, oil that's kind of more or less baked on. Get the underside, get that all cleaned up. We're gonna clean this grease out, check out all these cogs to this gear. This is where your planetary gear rides. So that gear there rides on these, and then the shaft right here goes in here, and the planetary sits on there like that. So when this shaft turns around, it spins the planetary around, which spins this gear along this gear, and then that's how your attachment spins. We're gonna get this cleaned up. We're gonna get these gears cleaned up, and then we'll be pretty much along the lines of putting everything back together and putting new grease in it. So another spot that food grime, dirt, whatever gets, and nobody really realizes or they don't see it, is in your knobs. Right in here, where the metal and the knob meet, always is caked with dirt and gunk and food and stuff. So when you're cleaning your mixers, or when I'm cleaning your mixers, I really put a lot of attention to making sure that I get all that nastiness scraped out of there and under there on both the bowl lock and on the speed control lever. You know, some of these come in really, really dirty. Some of them don't. No matter what, I go through and spend a lot of time cleaning them out, getting all the food gunk out of here where that ring goes in. So when you get them back, they're clean. Unfortunately, sometimes you're going to have staining, like on these here, where I just can't get that staining off. But all this gunk right here, we'll get that cleaned up.
My pants are big wet, but that's fine.
Okay, buddy. Are they wet from the snow?
No, the snow's a little bit cold.
Did your pants get wet from the snow?
Yeah, we were on a sleigh, and they got cold.
Okay.
Okay, Daddy?
Okay. So I like to go through each gear and get the grease out. That way I know that each cog of this gear is good and there's nothing wrong with it. Along with this one here and the hub gear, and I'll do the same to the worm following gear and all on this here once I get to that. Okay, so now we're going to tackle this fun mess. These can get broken down. I don't typically break them down unless like the worm following gear is damaged. If that's damaged, there's a little pin in here that you pop out, just like the planetary and the pivot for the head versus the base. So you pop that out, the shaft pulls out, There's little washers on the top and the bottom to calibrate it, and you can pop that out. This one's not damaged. As far as I can tell, I'll know more once I clean the grease off. Okay, so this assembly's good. Everything looks great. We're gonna set this. There's two little nubs here that it sits down on. So this hole here, this hole here, that's where those nubs go in, and then that gives your alignment for your screws. You're gonna put your big gear here with the washer, put that down on there. Slide. And this is where it can kind of be a little temperamental. Slide that shaft back up on there. Take your pin, your retaining pin, put that through that, drop it down, and then you just want to, oh, look at that, I got it the first time. You want to make sure that it sits in that groove that is in there. If it's not sitting in the groove, it'll be sitting up. See, if it's sitting up there like that, you just want to hold the gear and turn that shaft until it drops down in. So if you're watching, that's when it's sitting in its home and where it needs to be. Now we're going to take the gear and drop it down on where it needs to go, put the 3 screws where they go, and tighten it down. You want to make sure it's snug, but you don't want to do the old quarter half turn and end up stripping the head of the screw or snapping it off. That would be bad. So make sure it's good and snug, but you don't have to go gorilla tight on it and break it. Okay, so we're going to clean this catch ring bezel deal. It's kind of gnarly. So when doing these, be careful. This can be kind of sharp. I have cut myself a time or two on it. It's kind of like a paper cut. I find doing this over a trash can or a paper towel or something very handy because you can get a lot of gunk and stuff out of that. So I use my tool here and I just run it around. As you can see, getting some nastiness. I'll just run that around a time or two first. Scrape off what I can. If there's any stuck on hardness of food or oil that's dried, grease that's dried, I'll run that across. And then I'll take my tub of towels, kind of grab it like this, and just spin it around in my hand here. And this is where you got to be careful that you don't cut yourself too. And just spin that around. And as you can see, you get quite a lot of stuff here. And look at that. I mean, it looks brand new. The next thing I need to clean is the band. Be careful how kind of clean these. It is just thin metal. 1, you can cut yourself. 2, you don't want to misshape it because the more you bend this out of its shape, the harder it is sometimes to get on. So here's my grease kit. Okay, so in the kit, you have your food grade grease. You have a little spatula to apply the grease. And you get 2 different gaskets. If you have an Artisan, an Ultra, Power, pretty much any of the tilt heads, with the exception of your older professionals. So if you have an older professional like this one here, where it has the bolts down here on the bottom. Oh, there we go. Right here where there's bolts right here. These actually use the Artisan style heads or Artisan style gaskets. So it'd look like this here. This one here is for your Pro series, like your Pro 500, Pro 600. Those are completely different as far as doing a regrease on those. Those are different. If we need to, we can do a video on that for you guys. These are probably more common, I would guess. afar across households. So this is the gasket you're going to want, and it goes a certain way. So if you notice, 7 holes plus a bigger hole. So this is for all the bolts. Here are the screws that go on the planetary area, and then these 2 are back here on the housing. This one here is a reference point that goes right here on this nub. So when you lay it down, it needs to go like this, and it'll sit down just like that. If you put it on the other way, it's not going to fit right, and it's not cut out right here for this gear assembly. So I do not put the gasket on until after I've got everything greased, because I don't want to get grease on the gasket. I want that gasket to be as dry as it can be before I put it on. I don't want to have any grease on it and compromise it. So what I do is I grease this first. I save some grease to put down here in this gear area, and then I drop my gasket on and I drop it on the housing. So I'll show you that here in a second. So here's your grease. It's a 4-ounce container. That's going to go all in here. Now with the Pro Series, you cannot put that amount of grease in. They take about 1/3 of this. If you put too much grease in, they're not going to work properly. Don't put enough grease in it, they won't work properly. So you got to be careful if you're doing those professional series. You got to watch how much grease you're putting in. There's a lot more smaller parts, and the gears go in a certain way. And if you don't get it in just right, your transmission cover won't go on properly. So what I do is I take a little bit of grease like that, and I like to shove it up here underneath the gear here. You saw me pulling it out earlier. So I take this and I just kind of tuck it up underneath there. Make sure that, making sure that there's grease getting inside each one of those cogs of that gear. That way I know that those gears are lubricated properly. And that way when it makes its trip around, that everything's lubed up. So I'll turn this here a little bit. Get the back side here. Make sure that those have the grease. Then we're going to start. It's kind of like icing a cake. You just want to try to get a nice even coating on all the cogs. Bring it around, and then you just start taking more of that, and I'll push it in here, and I'll keep kind of taking that grease and working it up in and pushing it into those gears that are hidden back in here in that housing, so that there's grease pushed all the way back in there. And just keep pushing it in. Putting the grease on is probably the easiest part of this whole ordeal. Put a little bit on here. This goes down into that housing of the upper half. There's a little divot for it to sit down in, so I want to make sure that that's lubed up nicely so that it's, got some properties there to keep it from wearing on the housing of the mixer. And from what I've learned, you can't really over grease. There's no real way of putting too much grease on these tilt heads. It's the bowl lift style that you need to worry about putting too much grease in. So I'm going to leave about so much grease. That might be a little more than I need for that bottom portion. So I'll just kind of finish that off. So that is going to go on the underside, which we're going to do after we, hold on buddy, after we get everything put back together. Just a little easier, a little less chance of getting your fingers in it. At this point, we're going to take our gasket, very carefully set that down over, set it into place, kind of center it. Now it's ready to go on to the other housing. What we're going to do is we're going to take this upper. The biggest thing you need to be careful of is when you put this on, that you watch this area back here and your wires. If you get it on and the wire's just hanging over on this area here, you can pinch your wire, and if you're not paying attention and you start cranking down on your screws, you will slice that wire off or pinch it and damage the wire, and then you got electrical issues you will now have, and you have to fix that. So be very diligent about making sure that that's okay. So what we're going to do is take us here, flip it upside down. We're going to lower it down on to the upper, and in that upper, there's that little, you can kind of see that right there where my middle finger is. That piece there is where this shaft is going to sit down inside, and then this little nub here is going to sit on that other smaller one right about where my pointer finger is. So we're going to take us here, flip it upside down, lower it down onto it.
Like wood, Dad. It's like wood.
Give it a little bit of a jiggle. Make sure your two levers aren't pushed in too far. Make sure your wires are clear back here. So I'm going to spin this around. Look, yep, my wires are good. Spin it back around. Sometimes the gears do not want to mesh just right. Punch here, and I'll just ever so slightly turn the gears. A lot of times if it's not sitting down all the way and you turn those gears, you'll feel and hear it clunk and drop down, and then you know it's sitting right in place. Before I put my screws in, I make sure that that gasket isn't sticking out on either side too far, because then your holes won't line up. Everything's lined up there. So I'm going to get my screws here. And remember, the flat head ones go here. There's 5 of those for here. And then 2 round here and 2 round here. Right here is on the speed side is that one that has the lock washer. And that lock washer needs to go in that hole. Why? I don't know. But every mixer I've taken apart, that side is always the one that has the lock washer. These things put off a crazy amount of torque in the motor, so you really want to make sure that you have these snug, but not so tight that you're going to break something or strip the head out. There's also this screw right here. That's your adjustment for your head, to make sure that the head isn't sitting too low that your whisk or your paddle is scraping the bowl, but also that it's not sitting too high that it's not incorporating the ingredients. We're going to start tightening these down. I like to kind of go with the tightening lug nuts on a car. I'll start with the center first, run that one all the way down just till it's snug, and then I'll pop up here to this one and kind of go in like that star pattern. Then I'll drop down to this one here. As soon as that one's done, I'll come over to here, get this one. Then I'll pop up to this one here. This little lower work surface here, I built this just because I do so many. Honestly, this is like the second mixer I've done on this. Prior to that, I was doing everything up here on the dining room table. So it's not like it's something that you have to do it. It's just when you're doing 2 or 3 of them in a day, it really helps your body. So we'll get this one here done. Then I'm going to jump up to this one here. Once again, just always make sure that those wires are not pinched in here. That will make for a bad day. And then once we're done with this one, we're going to come back down to this one and make sure that this one is nice and tight. So that's good. That one's good. That one's good. Like I said, you don't want to go too strong on these. You don't want to take the chance of it snapping off, but just a good snugness will go a long ways. So those are all done. Now that that's done, you're going to take your planetary, and you want to kind of take a reference. I'll put this in so you can see it, what direction the hole is, so that when you drop this down in, you can get that hole to line up with it. You don't want to put it over here and then you're trying to turn it. So when you bring this in, you kind of want to get a reference point of where it's sitting. Before I drop that down on, though, I have these 2 washers I need to put in place. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our grease, and we're just going to take that here and just kind of go around the cog here and just put a little dollop around it all the way around, knowing that that way all those cogs have grease in them. That way when that spins around, it's all taken care of all the way around. It looks like the ones I've gotten that are fairly new that came from KitchenAid, they just kind of shoot a spot right here. And sometimes it works around, sometimes it doesn't. I just run it around there so I know for sure that it's all taken care of. Take your 2 washers, drop them down right on top. If you don't put it down there, these holes may not line up. So you want to make sure that you put the parts back where they came from. When this drops down on, sometimes it won't quite line up. It'll kind of stop like that and not go down anymore. That's where you just want to kind of turn this a little bit, or turn this here and move it back and forth until it drops down. This is a punch that was broken, so it's kind of pointed at an end. There you go. And I just use that to work that shaft up so I know it's lined up. Then I'll take my actual one and put it through and make sure that it's in true harmony, it's lined up. Once that's the case, you want to get your pin, your planetary pin here. I haven't wiped it off yet, so I'm going to give it a little wipe down. Get the schmutz, get the grease off of it. And then we're going to take that and we're going to pull this out. We're going to stick this in the hole. I'm going to take our hammer. I'm going to hold this here, and I do it this way because it helps me hold the mixer in place. And we're just going to tap that into place. And for the sake of the video here, I'll do it like this so you can see. Just be gentle and ginger with it. You don't want to go gung-ho on it. You don't want to chip the enamel on the planetary. If it's not going in, something's not right. Maybe you don't have all the washers in there. Maybe it's not lined up properly. I have had one of these recently that it did not want to come out when we were in the process of like breaking it down to clean it. To the point that I actually had to take it, lay it on its side like this, and one of us was holding it while the other one was holding the punch and the hammer and having to get it out. I almost got to the point where I was going to give up because I couldn't get it and I didn't want to break it. This one was fine. That one, it was really, really dirty and it was really gunked up. So now we're going to take our bezel, put it right on here. Great thing about with the rubber mallet, you're not going to dent it. And it's a pressure fit. So you just kind of need to line it up, give it a little tap here and there, and just go all the way around. Make sure it's on. Once that's on, I'll take my tub of towel again, give a wipe down, make sure I get all my fingerprints and all the dirt and smudges off of it. And now this is ready to get married to the base. Something I forgot to say here, you're going to want to take your wires here, and to get them, especially these ones with the black hard ones. Unfortunately, I didn't have one that is the newer style that I could show you. That one, you just literally grab it and it pulls right out. But this one here, you're going to want to put those wires through that little channel there. Slip it in, push it down, and then some of them will stay, some of them will pop out. This one wants to pop out, so I'm just going to take my pliers and rotate it. Quarter turn, half turn, and then it'll stay in. So now this is pretty much done, short of marrying it back to its partner, which once its partner is clean, then I will do that. Till then, I'm going to wrap this cord up so it's out of the way. We'll wipe the cord down very last, right before we plug it in, and make sure it's running properly. All right, so here's the base. There's not much to it. You have your pin here. That is your pivot point for the top of the actual mixer, the motor, the gears, all that. You have your bowl lock, and that's it, your feet. So if your mixer's bouncing around, carrying on, check your feet. These actually are in pretty decent shape. There's actually some height to them. I had one the other day that the feet were like flush with the actual stand. But yeah, if this thing, if your mixer is jumping around and carrying on and bouncing around, or it's wobbly, a lot of times it is in the head. It looks like it is, but it's actually these feet. So these are simple. You just put a pair of pliers into that hole and grab it on here, pull it out, and pop new ones in. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this here, take my rag, we're going to wipe this pin down. This is where, when we had it flipped upside down and we were undoing the first flathead screw, it locks onto here. You can kind of see, well, maybe if the light will work with me, maybe not. It locks right in here, and that keeps this pin from sliding back and forth. Wipe this down good, make sure it's nice and clean. We're going to take our towel here, scrub this down, get the schmutz off. You can see it's kind of dirty back here. Scrub that good. If it doesn't come off by hand, I'll take my little tool here and just gently scrape that off. I'll take my pick. I'm going to go inside the Phillips head of these screws here, get all the food gunk out of those. Some of them are pretty well packed shut. Pick that out. And then I'll come in with my screwdriver. If your bowl is not locking into your mixer stand, it's one of two things. It's either this is worn out or the bowl has gotten damaged. These little grooves here, kind of hard to show. Yeah, right here. Something's happened here that doesn't want to lock into this base. So it's one of those two things. I've found more common for us when they've come in-house that it was the base plate, not the bowl. I only have had one come through the door where it was the bowl, not the base plate. But nonetheless, if you need a new base plate, we can get that for you. Or you could go to Mr. Mixer and get one from Zach. They're great people over there. So we're going to, sometimes they pop off easy. There we go. Look at all that. I mean, and you thought the base was clean. So we're going to take this here. We're going to scrub that clean. We're going to get the underside clean. Once again, this edge can be sharp, so watch yourself with your fingers. Probably going to start with this and just kind of knock off the majority of it. Take our tub of towel here. And you don't have to use tub of towels. I just find that they work really good. When I started out, it was paper towels and Simple Green. But these cloths really hold up to the rough edges and really do a good job. So they're worth it, in my opinion, to use. Get down underneath those bowl locks. Scrub down into those countersunk spots for those screws. Look at that. Nice and clean. So now the actual base here. So once again, I'm just going to take my tool, gently scrape. I don't want to chip off the enamel. I just want to knock off the bulk of the junk. Pretty well good. Not quite there yet. We're going to give it a good wipe down now. We'll take this and just run it around the edges. Nice and clean. Doesn't have a certain orientation. Doesn't have to be a certain way. Just as long as those three holes line up with the three spots underneath where the screws go into. You're going to drop those in. Take your screwdriver and run them down on. Make sure you don't cross thread them. These are kind of easy to do. So we're going to make sure they're snug. All right, now the base, other than giving another little wipe down, this is where your bowl or your headlock goes in. The little piece that slides down in there, that goes right there. So I was talking about the little indent here, or what that's for. So when you lock the head, this little piece pops up here and it goes into that hole. So now we're going to marry this to that. We're going to take your base, flip it upside down, make sure your lock is tucked away, put it down on. You're going to insert your pin. We're going to need to give it a little love tap. Grabbing my pin here. So the goal is to have it equal on each side. So it's just going to be ever so slightly sticking out on both sides. And then down in here, right down in there is that little set screw. And we're going to turn that set screw and tighten it against that pin so that the pin doesn't work out, but it still pivot on that pin. So you just want to get nice snug tight on that. It's done on this side. So now we'll lock the head, grab it, flip it over onto the table, and we're going to work on the back half now. So this is your speed control plate, and it's a very delicate piece. This is where all your electric goes. When you're, these are your top screw and your bottom screw. This is your lower speeds, and this is your upper speeds. And when this moves, it has a rod that pushes out and a spring, and that's how you get your speeds. When you're working with this, or even when you're working with the back cap off, you really want to be careful to not drop it on it or bump it or do anything that would damage it, get it out of its calibration. It is kind of a pain to get it calibrated and get it in the right spot. So I'm just taking a really soft bristle toothbrush and I'm just kind of brushing this off. This one's kind of oily. So I'm just trying to get some of that gunk off there. Let it breathe, let it work properly. Just be gentle with it. Sometimes I've gotten these where it is just caked in flour and it is just terrible. So you really just want to just be careful with it. You know, it's very, very, very thin copper that controls your mixer. So you just want to make sure you're not going overzealous on it and really pushing things around and moving them around here. They're kind of a pain to replace. It's almost easier. I mean, it can be done without it being split, but almost every time when you go to replace the speed plate, if you go to do it, you almost end up always having to split it in half because of the spring goes and the push rod goes. And I really think that if you're going to go to the extent of replacing the plate, you might as well replace the speed rod, push rod, and the spring, and just kind of give it a good maintenance. Replace all those parts. That way you don't split it in half, replace one part only to find out you need to do another part to go with it. These older ones here, that washer you see right, or not washer, that nut you see right there, that holds the housing for the bearing that sits right back here. That's part of the motor, and the governor sits on that. Sometimes when your mixer gets kind of loud and starts carrying on, what happens is those nuts work loose enough that it chatters. So I always like to just kind of take a pair of needle nose pliers and gently reach in there and just make sure that both sides are where they need to be on that bearing housing and that they're not too loose. Also, you want to make sure they're not too tight. If they're too tight, it'll act up also. Okay, so now we're going to put the band back on. You'll set it up over where your hub assembly is, where your attachments go on. You're going to get the one side in. And this one I have a feeling is going to cause me a little issues because it got damaged when the customer was dropping it off. But just kind of want to snap that in and get it bent over here. Sometimes it can be kind of a booger to get lined up. So, okay, so this one definitely fought me. Sometimes you got to get one side in, get that screw in, leave it a little loose, push that band all the way around until you get to the other side, and then kind of push it over so you can get those holes to line up to get those 2 little Phillips head screws in. So then what I like to do here is I like to plug it in, make sure it's off, plug it in, and go through the speeds, make sure everything sounds good before you put it back on. A lot of times I'll even do that before I put the band on. So we're going to start it up here. Sounds good. I'm going to take my cloth here, my rag, I'm going to wipe the extension cord, the cord that goes to the mixer. Make sure that's nice and clean. Send it back as pretty as I can. And I'll show you one other thing. Oh, let me get the back cap on here real quick. So the back cap, you're going to take, see those little feet, those little nubs, they go right in here, right up in here. You're going to just take that, take it in, set it on that. It's going to drop down a little bit. You're going to take your cap screw, set that down in there. We are done with the insides of that mixer. One other thing I like to do when I have them, and I just want to make sure it's clean, make sure that it's working good. Right here, you got to be careful with it, but pop this cap off here, and I like to spin this off. You know, be careful, there's a spring in there, and there's a little cap here. So set that to the side, but you can kind of see how there's some filth on that. So I like to wipe that clean. Sometimes, depending on the mixer, in that groove, it's dirty, so I'll take my rag and a pick or my little scraping tool, get that clean, and take that cap, put it back in there. If you're careful enough, that spring won't come, or that spring won't come out. What it has is a little magnet on it, and that has to go in a certain way. If you look here, you can see that it's not quite a square. And if you look inside there, you'll see a little nub that sticks out, and that's where that little angle piece goes in. So you always want to make sure you put these back in the same direction they came, or your mixer will not run. Actually, the first mixer that wasn't ours that I got, the gal said it didn't run and wanted to know if I would take a look at it. And that was the first thing I ended up checking out. And as soon as I put that back in the position it needed to be, it ran. So there's one on both sides of the tilt heads, and on the older like professional series they are, but it's like I said, it's pretty much the same machine, it just is on a lift stand. So we're going to wipe that off, get that clean, put that on here, make sure you don't cross thread it, spin it backwards until it feels like it lines up just right. Spin that back on. And this mixer is done. It is ready to go back to its owner and bake more cookies or bread. So that's what I do. Depending on the mixer and depending on what it needs, depends on how long it takes me. If a mixer is really, really, really dirty, then it might take me 2 hours or more just for a regrease, depending on how filthy the outside is, how much I have to scrub it and clean it. This one was pretty clean, so it didn't really take me as long. This one is ready to go back. I hope this helped. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'll do my best to help you and guide you through repairing your own, or if you just want to send it over to us and have us do it, we can do that too. And we will talk to you later. Have a good rest of your day.